Hello everyone, I'm Colin Canet. Today we're going to look at 5 more workshop hacks, and maybe some of them you can use in your workshop as well. But before I do that, I want to thank everybody who's supported me by subscribing to my channel. I sincerely appreciate it. Let's get on to the first hack. So the first thing I'm going to show you today is just a plywood carrier. Some people call it a sheet goods carrier, but I mostly carry plywood with it. I'm not going to show you how to make it today, but I am going to put the instructions and the dimensions on Woodwork Web. So if you want to make one of these, it's just made out of scrap wood. And you know what? If you're hauling plywood around, sheets of plywood, this is so much easier than trying to lug them around, just holding them in your hands. The plywood fits in here. You hold it by the handle, and this scrap piece of wood I've got here is 4 feet high, but you know, look at that. It just holds the plywood at the right angle. You can see over top of it, so you can see where you're going. It's a great little addition and something you might want to make if you're using plywood in your workshop. Now here's a little tip for anybody who's sharpening your own plane blades or your own chisel blades, and you can see that I have a magnet on top here, and what that magnet does is it magnetizes, of course, the end of the blade, so that when you're sharpening, as you're moving your blade around on top of your emery paper, your sharpening paper, what's happening, and you can actually see that because it's picking up. See how it's picking up? You can see that it's actually picking up the iron filings off of the paper. So it's keeping the paper cleaner and allowing you to get a little bit better sharpening because it's removing that what normally you might use water to move that around with. Now you can do that with just putting a magnet, and there's a fairly strong magnet on there, and it's picking up. And if I use my rag here, you'll be able to see when I open that up, and that's all the iron filings that's picked up. So great way of keeping your paper clear and sharpening, getting a good sharpen at the same time. It seems I'm forever cutting bolts and redi-rod. Let me show you 2 methods that I use. So the method I'm going to show you, the first one is the one that I use the most often. I just get a scrap piece of wood. In this case it's plywood. I've just run the end of it through my table saw blade and back, and it doesn't even matter if it's in the middle. Then I put it in my vise. The other thing I do is drill a small hole that's just the right diameter for, in this case, a redi-rod or whatever it is I'm cutting. And for small things like this, I almost always use a hacksaw. And I do that because there's less chance of sparks. So it's a little bit safer to do. It takes a tiny bit longer, but I just prefer it. And now that bar is not going to move around in there. The saw is not going to jump from thread to thread, and it'll make a nice clean cut for you. Now this second method I don't use as often because it damages this thread down here, because what we're going to do is put this into our drill, our portable cordless drill, or you could use a corded drill, and just tighten it down there. And then I like to put the drill in reverse and use the same hacksaw. And now what I do is turn the drill on, and it will now run, and I like to move this across so that I'm not using the same teeth, and it takes about the same length of time as the first method that I showed you. It's just a different way of kind of doing the same thing, but I'll show you, just give you an idea what it looks like. And that's it. Now these, you have to put nuts on here, otherwise that blade will tend to move up and down the thread, and these are locked on here. But one of the advantages of doing this, I'm just going to unlock those nuts on there. One of the advantages of using this method and having nuts on the end there, and it's a good idea to do that whenever you're cutting off thread like this, is almost always when you take the nut off, it tends to dress this thread on here. So when you go to put a nut back on there, yeah, there it goes. It goes on quite nicely now. Well, I'm not the most organized person in the world, as some of you may attest to, but when it comes to my corded tools, for years and years now, I've made a point of using these red Velcro strips, and I always use the red ones because they tend to stand out more. They're easier to use for me, and they're very easy to use. They wrap on every cord. I put them on every corded tool that I have, and that way now when I pull a tool out of a cabinet, it doesn't grab the cord, doesn't grab another one, doesn't get mixed up with something. It just saves me so much frustration. It takes a little bit more time wrapping the cords up each time, but I think in the end it actually saves me time. But if you look at all of my corded tools, all of them have that little red band, that little red Velcro band around them, and it makes a big difference for me in my workshop in trying to keep me organized. Now, recently I started to use one of these magnetic pads, and this is magnetic. You can buy these at the dollar store. It's just like a pad, but there's a slight magnetism to them, and for holding nuts and bolts when you're taking things apart or putting things together, it holds the nuts and bolts fairly strongly on there. And for me, I always find that I have nuts and bolts and screws that roll off onto the floor, and this way it keeps them all in one place. I know where they are. I love the contrast compared to the workbench, so I don't have to snoop around for where I left a nut or bolt. They are all sitting on top of this pad, and they're not going to go anywhere. It's a great little addition to your workbench top. Well, that concludes my video today. A few tips and tricks on things you can do in your workshop. I hope there's some things there that are useful to you. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.